I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Princess Anne had spent a lifetime believing she understood her mother's silences. But one private diary changed that forever. Hidden among Queen Elizabeth II's personal effects was a handwritten warning, addressed not to Charles, not to Anne, but to Prince William. And when Anne realized the warning concerned Camilla's future influence inside the monarchy, grief turned instantly into alarm. What she read next would force the Princess Royal to make a choice she could no longer avoid. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne stood over the sealed collection at Windsor with grief she carried quietly. She had been trusted within the family to sort personal belongings after Elizabeth's death, making the discovery intimate. This was not a constitutional archive or formal state record. It was a family collection, preserved because some memories were too personal. Her hand slowed when she found the diary. Anne recognized the handwriting immediately, and the familiar strokes struck harder than any official seal. She turned the pages until one passage stopped her cold. The late Queen had written that William must protect the future crown from allowing Camilla too much influence over decisions connected to the next reign. The future crown meant the authority William would inherit as king, making the warning serious. Anne sat down without speaking. She ran her thumb across the handwriting and read the passage 3 times, because its urgency felt unlike the calm mother she remembered. Elizabeth had feared that William's instinct to keep peace inside the family could pressure him into surrendering his own judgment. That possibility awakened something fierce in Anne. Her grief became protection. Then the date changed everything. Another entry referred to a private exchange between Elizabeth and Camilla, tense enough to alter the monarch's view of how far the queen consort might try to shape palace decisions. Anne understood that a queen consort is the wife of a reigning king, carrying status and public duties without holding the sovereign's constitutional authority. Elizabeth's concern was not ceremonial rank, it was influence. A slim envelope fell from between the pages. William's name was written across the front. Anne did not open it. She closed the diary, secured the room, and requested a private meeting with her nephew before anyone else could interfere. Then came the message that tightened everything. Camilla had already been told Elizabeth's private papers were being reviewed. Anne knew the warning existed. What she did not yet know was how much Camilla understood about it, or why Elizabeth had feared her influence enough to write William's name beside that fear. The diary did not create the fractures inside the family. It exposed them. Anne feared failing her mother. William feared being forced to choose between loyalty and duty. And Camilla feared something far more immediate: the possibility that a voice from Elizabeth's past could strip away influence she had spent years carefully building. Behind closed doors, none of them were fighting merely over a notebook. They were fighting over who would shape the monarchy after Charles. Anne carried the weight differently, because duty had always been personal to her. She had spent decades watching Elizabeth place responsibility before comfort, and ignoring the warning now felt like abandoning one of her mother's final instincts. William faced something harder. As the heir after Charles, every private disagreement around him could eventually become a problem for the crown, meaning the monarchy itself, rather than simply the family living inside it. Anne could treat the words as a warning. He had to decide whether they were guidance, memory, or a voice from the past reaching too far into his future. Anne placed the closed diary on the table between them and said nothing. William noticed the envelope carrying his name, but he did not touch it. His eyes stayed on his aunt instead. "How worried was she?" he asked quietly. Anne hesitated, and that brief silence answered more than any dramatic speech could have done. She finally told him Elizabeth had not written casually. The late Queen had been thinking about the future, about pressure, and about the danger of affection becoming influence when a monarch wanted peace more than confrontation. Camilla felt the shift before anyone explained it to her. An aide informed her that Anne had met William privately, and her first question was whether Charles knew. When the answer remained uncertain, she dismissed the aide and stayed alone with the knowledge that Elizabeth's private judgment might suddenly be shaping conversations from which she had been excluded. She had spent years building trust beside the king. Now she feared that one hidden page could redefine how that trust was viewed. William finally opened the diary again. Elizabeth had warned that the future sovereign must never allow personal affection around the monarch to become informal political authority inside the family. Political authority, in simple terms, meant influence over decisions that properly belonged to the sovereign and his official advisors. The words disturbed him because they described exactly the kind of blurred boundary he had always hoped to avoid. Then William opened the envelope. The message was short, but it struck harder than the longer diary entry. Elizabeth urged him to trust Anne whenever family loyalty and responsibility to the crown pulled in opposite directions. He read it twice, lowered the paper, and looked across at his aunt. William did not ask whether the warning was real anymore. He asked what had happened to make his grandmother write it. Anne turned back through the diary, found the date, and stopped. The answer was buried in a private family meeting none of them had ever publicly confronted. Every warning has a beginning, and Elizabeth's began during one private evening that the palace had almost succeeded in forgetting. Years before the diary was discovered, a disagreement over William's future household had drawn Elizabeth, Charles, Camilla, and Anne into the same room. What began as a discussion about responsibilities ended with the late Queen making a judgment she would never publicly explain. The diary now revealed that this was the night she began preparing William for a battle he did not yet know was coming. Anne remembered the meeting because the tension had arrived slowly. The discussion concerned William's future royal household, meaning the team of advisors and staff who would support him as his responsibilities grew. Elizabeth was not worried about ceremony or titles. She was watching something deeper. Who would advise the future king? Who would speak around him? And whether family loyalty might blur the line between support and control. Camilla pushed the conversation further than anyone expected. She argued that major family decisions affecting public reputation should continue passing through Charles's household even after William became the central figure of the monarchy's next generation. Her reasoning was stability. If the family spoke through one established structure, she believed damaging divisions could be avoided. William disagreed. He said his future responsibilities would require independence, not another layer of approval. Elizabeth became still. Anne noticed it immediately because her mother rarely needed anger to show displeasure. Camilla continued explaining that coordination through Charles could protect William from mistakes, but the prince did not soften. He understood that an heir apparent, the person first in line to inherit the throne, could not prepare for kingship while allowing another household to quietly shape every difficult decision. Charles felt the room tightening around him. He tried to calm both sides, telling his wife that William was not rejecting cooperation and reminding his son that experience still mattered. Yet Elizabeth offered neither side comfort. She closed the folder in front of her, brought the conversation to an abrupt end, and left Camilla without the reassurance she had clearly expected. Anne stayed behind when her mother quietly asked her to remain. Elizabeth did not attack Camilla or accuse Charles of weakness. She simply said that William must eventually be given room to become himself. Those words remained with Anne because the sadness behind them felt heavier than anger. The monarch had seen a future conflict forming long before anyone else was willing to name it. The diary now confirmed what happened afterward. Elizabeth wrote her first warning that same night, fearing William's desire to preserve family peace could one day make him vulnerable to pressure. Anne finally understood that the message had never come from sudden hostility toward Camilla. Her mother had watched a boundary being tested and decided someone had to remember where it belonged. Anne closed the diary and looked at William. She told him Camilla deserved to hear exactly what Elizabeth had written. The prince expected an aid, a careful message, perhaps another private note. But Anne was already preparing to face her herself. There was no audience, no palace statement, and no advisor standing between them. Princess Anne asked Camilla into a private room and closed the door herself. On the table lay Elizabeth's diary. Neither woman sat down at first. Years of restraint, loyalty, resentment, and unspoken hierarchy were suddenly reduced to a few feet of silence. Then Anne placed one finger on the page containing William's name and told Camilla exactly why she had called her there. Anne had chosen this confrontation because she refused to let her mother's words become gossip passed between competing royal households. Camilla had expected a conversation about Elizabeth's personal belongings, but the diary changed everything the moment she saw it. A royal household, in simple terms, is the group of staff and advisors supporting a senior royal figure. Anne knew that once different households began interpreting the same private warning, the truth could be buried beneath loyalty and self-protection. Camilla remained standing as Anne opened the marked page. The princess read the warning aloud without raising her voice, and that restraint made the words feel even sharper. The queen consort moved a chair back slightly, but did not sit. When Anne finished, she asked the question that had clearly been building inside her from the first sentence. Did William believe Elizabeth had written those words specifically against her? Anne answered carefully. She said the warning was about influence, not revenge, and about protecting the future sovereign's judgment from pressure inside the family. Camilla's control cracked. She reminded Anne that she had spent years supporting Charles through public hostility, private strain, and the weight of kingship. She would not accept being reduced to a woman secretly trying to control William after everything she had endured beside the king. Anne did not retreat. She turned to the dated entry connected to the old Windsor meeting and showed Camilla where Elizabeth had recorded her concern. The queen consort recognized the moment instantly. Her expression hardened, then changed again as she realized the late monarch had interpreted that conversation very differently. What Camilla remembered as an argument for stability, Elizabeth had remembered as a warning about boundaries. Camilla finally admitted the central truth. She had argued for Charles's household to retain greater coordination over decisions affecting William's future, because she believed one clear structure would prevent division. She insisted that her motive had never been personal power. Anne listened, then answered with the sentence that ended the argument. Good intentions did not remove the need to know when to step aside. Camilla went quiet. Then she asked the only question Anne could not answer for him. And what exactly does he intend to do with this? Anne closed the diary. The warning had been delivered. The confrontation was over. But the real decision now belonged to William. Elizabeth could warn him. Anne could defend him. Camilla could challenge the meaning of every sentence. But only William could decide what happened next. Alone with the diary, the prince faced an uncomfortable truth. Doing nothing would preserve family calm today, while leaving the same argument waiting for him tomorrow. By the time he rose from the table, he had reached a decision that neither punished Camilla nor ignored Elizabeth. He would draw the boundary himself, and make it impossible to misunderstand. William understood that the diary carried no constitutional power over him. It could not command the future king, remove anyone from a role, or decide how his reign would function. Its force was personal and moral. Elizabeth had left him a warning, but the choice still belonged to him. That mattered, because if he simply obeyed her words, he would be replacing one kind of influence with another. Anne sat with him as he worked through the real problem beneath the family drama. William's future household would eventually become the center of his own royal work, supported by advisors and staff responsible directly to him. As his duties grew, he needed to know where cooperation with Charles ended and where independent authority began. The issue was no longer Camilla alone. It was whether the next reign would be allowed to prepare itself without another household quietly shaping its decisions. William admitted what troubled him most. He did not fear Camilla as an enemy. He feared another family fracture consuming time, loyalty, and public trust. Anne listened before answering with the bluntness he expected from her. Avoiding a boundary, she told him, did not make the boundary disappear. It only guaranteed that someone would be forced to fight over it later. William chose his words carefully because he had no desire to humiliate his father's wife. He decided that matters concerning his future household, his children's long-term royal roles, and preparations for his eventual reign would remain under his direct control. Charles and Camilla could advise when asked, but no informal approval from their wider household would be expected. The distinction was quiet, but its meaning was enormous. Charles heard the decision before anyone outside the immediate family. William placed a short written summary in front of his father and made one point unmistakable. This was his decision. Anne had not ordered it. Elizabeth had not ruled from beyond the grave. The prince had read the warning, considered the history, and chosen the line himself. Charles read the final sentence twice. He placed the paper down slowly and looked at his son. Then came the question neither of them could avoid. Has Camilla already been told? William said nothing. And in that silence, the king understood that the boundary had already become personal. The confrontation had been fierce. The decision that followed was quieter and far more painful. Camilla did not lose a title, a residence, or a ceremonial position. She lost something less visible, the assumption that her voice would naturally carry into William's future reign. When Charles explained what his son had decided, she said almost nothing. But after he left, Camilla remained seated beside the same untouched cup of tea, realizing Elizabeth's private warning had now become a boundary she could actually feel. Charles delivered the decision himself, because he knew it could not arrive through an aide. William's future household would now handle its long-term planning without informal approval, passing through channels connected to his father's wider team. That mattered because a royal household is the staff and advisors supporting a senior member of the family. And separating those channels meant William was quietly protecting his independence before becoming king. The king made clear that Camilla's position beside him had not changed. The boundary concerned the next generation. Camilla listened without interrupting. She asked only one question at first. Had Anne pushed William into doing this? Charles answered that their son had made the decision himself, after reading Elizabeth's warning and considering what it meant. The queen consort stiffened at that answer. Anne's confrontation had been painful, but she could argue with Anne. William's independent choice was harder to dismiss because it showed the concern had moved beyond one woman defending her mother. Camilla felt the loss more sharply once she was alone. She had spent years beside Charles, enduring hostility and slowly earning a place within the institution. Yet none of that guaranteed the same closeness to power when William eventually inherited the crown. The realization was not about ceremony, it was about relevance. For the first time, she understood that one reign could end not only with a change of sovereign, but with an entire network of influence quietly disappearing with it. Camilla asked to see a copy of the diary passage. Anne refused. She would not allow Elizabeth's private journal to begin circulating between royal households, like evidence in a family prosecution. That refusal unsettled the queen consort even more, because she could not know what else the late monarch had written, or whether another page carried an even harsher judgment. Charles confronted Anne privately soon afterward. He warned that the diary could not become a weapon used every time the family disagreed. She surprised him by agreeing immediately. Anne said once William had understood the warning, the journal would return to secure family custody, meaning protected private storage rather than something available for ordinary palace use. Then William made one final request before that happened. He wanted to meet Camilla alone. No Anne, no Charles, no diary placed between them. And for the first time, the two people most affected by Elizabeth's warning would have to speak for themselves. No diary lay between them this time. No Anne, no Charles. No private secretary waiting outside to explain what either side had meant. William and Camilla sat across from one another, with nothing but the consequences of Elizabeth's words hanging in the silence. Camilla expected judgment. William arrived seeking something harder, clarity. And in the conversation that followed, both finally acknowledged the fear beneath the conflict, the fear of being erased from a monarchy moving toward a new generation. William had asked for privacy because he refused to let Elizabeth's warning become a permanent accusation hanging over Camilla. The boundary he had drawn was about the future structure of the monarchy, not a campaign to humiliate her. A private secretary is a senior aide who helps organize a royal figure's official work and communications. But William wanted no one in the room who could soften, reinterpret, or carry the conversation elsewhere. This had to come directly from him. Camilla understood immediately that there was no appeal left to make through Charles. She had already heard the decision. She had already faced Anne. Now the future king was sitting opposite her, and the absence of everyone else made the truth harder to avoid. She told William that years of being treated as an outsider had changed her. Every place she eventually earned beside the king had been fought for under suspicion, and stepping away from influence now felt painfully similar to being pushed back outside. William listened before answering. He told Camilla he understood what public suspicion could do to a family, because he had grown up watching private pain become public judgment. But he could not allow his children, his future household, or the next reign to inherit struggles that belonged to an earlier chapter. The prince was not asking her to disappear. He was asking her to accept where one reign ended and another would eventually begin. Camilla finally admitted what she had resisted saying aloud. During the old Windsor discussion, she had pushed too hard. She believed continuity around Charles would protect the monarchy from confusion, and at the time, she saw that position as loyalty. Now she understood why Elizabeth had seen the same argument differently. What felt like stability from one side could look like control from the other. William made the distinction carefully. Camilla would be respected beside his father and within the family. Her service during Charles's reign would not be erased, but his future reign had to develop without every withdrawal of influence being treated as rejection. The queen consort sat with that for several seconds, then accepted it. For the first time, the conflict seemed to loosen. Then the private calm shattered. Word of Elizabeth's diary had begun leaking beyond palace walls, and what the family had just settled in silence was about to become a national drama. By morning, the private warning had escaped the walls that were meant to contain it. Britain did not see the full diary, but it saw enough to understand the extraordinary shape of the story. Elizabeth had written a warning for William, Anne had confronted Camilla, and the future king had drawn a boundary around his reign. Suddenly, a family argument became a debate about succession, influence, memory, and whether the late queen was still shaping the monarchy years after her death. Palace communications staff moved quickly, because silence now carried its own risk. They refused to release Elizabeth's private writing, and stressed that family papers would remain private. They also made clear that William's household arrangements were his responsibility alone. That mattered, because succession, the process by which the crown passes from one sovereign to the next, was no longer being discussed as a distant future event. The public was watching William behave like a man already learning how to protect the independence of his eventual reign. Anne watched the coverage with growing frustration. Commentators reduced the confrontation to a personal feud between two women, and that angered her more than the leak itself. She told a family member that the purpose had never been to destroy Camilla. It had been to preserve a boundary Elizabeth believed mattered for William. Anne could accept disagreement. What she could not accept was watching duty turned into spectacle, while the real reason behind her actions disappeared beneath louder headlines. Camilla faced a different kind of pain. Her name dominated the coverage even after she had accepted William's decision in private. The Queen Consort had already explained why she pushed for continuity around Charles, but millions now debated her motives without hearing that conversation. She understood the cruel contrast immediately. Inside the family, the conflict had moved toward peace, while outside, the story was becoming more dramatic by the hour. The public mood crystallized outside Buckingham Palace. A crowd gathered near the gates as an evening broadcaster opened its royal segment with the words, "Elizabeth's final warning." Newspapers showed Anne and Camilla positioned on opposite sides of William, turning one private disagreement into a symbol of competing royal generations. Visitors stopped to read the front pages, and suddenly the diary felt less like a family object and more like a national verdict. William surprised many observers by refusing to feed the spectacle. Public discussion increasingly focused on his restraint. He had heard Elizabeth's warning, considered Anne's concern, faced Camilla directly, and still made the decision in his own name. Then he made one final choice. The diary would be sealed again. Elizabeth's warning had done its work. William would not allow it to rule the family through fear any longer. In the end, Elizabeth's diary did not destroy Camilla, empower Anne, or hand William a set of instructions for his future reign. It did something more important. It forced three people carrying three different versions of loyalty to speak truths they had avoided for years. Anne defended the instinct of the mother she had lost. Camilla confronted the limits of the influence she had gained. And William proved that remembering Elizabeth did not mean allowing her fears to make his decisions forever. William made the final order quietly. The diary would return to secure private family custody, meaning protected storage, reserved for deeply personal royal material, rather than something passed between households whenever disagreements surfaced. He kept no copy of the warning. He also made clear that individual passages would never become weapons in future family arguments. The prince had listened to his grandmother, but he refused to let her private fears govern people who still had to live together. Anne watched the diary disappear back into its protective case. She touched the cover once before letting it go, and the gesture carried everything she had refused to say aloud. She had found the warning, delivered it to William, confronted Camilla, and defended what she believed Elizabeth had wanted him to understand. Now her role was finished. The relief mattered, because duty had carried her this far, but grief reminded her that no final instruction could bring her mother back. Camilla accepted a different ending. She would not regain the informal influence she once assumed might continue into William's future reign. Yet she had not been cast aside either. The Queen Consort chose to focus on supporting Charles and the responsibilities of the present monarchy, rather than fighting for authority over the next one. What had first felt like humiliation slowly became clarity. Her place remained real, but its limits were now equally real. William finally spoke to Anne in private after the diary had been secured. He told his aunt that Elizabeth's greatest lesson had never been blind obedience to the past. It had been duty to what came next. The future king would carry his grandmother's discipline, caution, and sense of service into his own reign, but he would not inherit every anxiety she had written down in private. The truth was simpler than the scandal surrounding the diary. Elizabeth had recognized that every future monarch eventually reaches a moment when affection, expectation, and responsibility pull in different directions. At that point, no parent, advisor, spouse, or memory can make the choice for them. Anne forced the truth into the open. Camilla accepted the boundary. William settled the issue. Elizabeth left behind a warning. Anne found the courage to deliver it. Camilla faced what it meant, and William made the final choice. The crown he would one day inherit would respect the past, but it would belong to the future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.